2, 3, we're live.
Hello, thank you all for joining us today for our second webinar in an 8-part series for the Berkeley Master Plan. My name is Erin Schluto and I'm the Community Development Director with the City of Berkeley. With me today is Ben Carlisle, Principal Planner, and Megan Mason-Minnick, Planner from Carlisle Wortman Associates. As you may know, we are updating the Berkeley Master Plan from its current version, which was adopted in 2007. A lot has changed in Berkeley and the world since then, so it's important to keep that guiding planning document current and reflective of the needs and goals of the community. One of the most important components of updating a master plan document is getting community member feedback. That includes business owners, property owners, residents, etc. Prior to the global pandemic, we began a robust and extensive community engagement strategy to get the thoughts and opinions of Berkeley residents. This included visits to all city boards and commissions, PTA groups, moms and dads clubs, visits to Berkeley High School and Oxford Towers, and setting up booths and activities at the many community events throughout the summer, Berkeley Days, Cruise Fest, and more. Unfortunately, those engagement activities had to be canceled, but we did not want to stop the forward momentum and the wonderful feedback we were receiving from the community. So we had to think outside the box and devise an entirely new engagement strategy. This 8-part series will examine a new topic each week. Last week, we began the series with an introduction session. What is a master plan? Today, we will expand on that by discussing the existing conditions of Berkeley. The webinar series will be led by a 3-person panel, including myself, Ben, and Megan. Carlisle Wortman Associates has been retained to assist the City of Berkeley with updating the master plan and leading these community engagement activities. If you have questions throughout the presentation, you can type your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen at any point during the presentation. Or you can use the raise your hand function after the presentation has concluded and ask your question directly to one of our panelists. Without further ado, Megan.
Thanks, Erin, for the introduction. We wanted to start off with a bit of review from the last webinar, specifically looking at what is a master plan. And simply put, it's the city's roadmap for the best path from a known present into an unknown future. But how do you create that? How do you create that roadmap? And what we do is we use what we call the 3 whats method, where we analyze with you, the community, what's important to your community, and then ask, so what? Or why are these issues important? And then, now what? Or what do we need to do? And part of the what and the so what is looking at existing conditions. We wanted to spend some time with you today to share what we've discovered about existing conditions in Berkeley in our research since January in terms of history, current land use, demographics, and trends. At the end of this presentation, as Erin said, we'll answer any questions, but feel free to put questions or comments in the Q&A at any time. And we would also love to hear from you what your observations are about the existing conditions in Berkeley. We always look at the history of a community because, as my high school social studies teacher said, you don't know where you're going until you understand where you've been. Also, especially in Berkeley, how things were originally designed and built directly affect what's going on the ground today. And sources used to compile this history include articles on the history of Berkeley that's posted on the city's website, including a great timeline that's provided by the Berkeley Historical Museum, Wikipedia, and also Michigan State Extension, as well as looking at some of the original plat maps of the city. As you can see, prior to and in the early 1800s, Berkeley was part of what was called Royal Oak Township, which was originally platted and which was originally surveyed in the 1800s. And that area today is home to Berkeley, Clawson, Ferndale, Hazel Park, Huntington Woods, Madison Heights, Oak Park, Pleasant Ridge, Royal Oak, and Royal Oak, and what's left of Royal Oak Township. And so it's quite a large area if you think about it. But in the early 1800s, the area that is Berkeley today was mostly forest and swamp, and there wasn't a native village in this area. There was what was known as the Ottawa Indian Gardens, now Roseland Cemetery, and that was one of the few places in Berkeley that was sheltered and dry enough for Native people to plant gardens of squash and corn and they would harvest those in the fall as they returned from making a circuit through Canada or Ohio. After the War of 1812, land grants were distributed to white settlers in this area, again known as Royal Oak Township, and that became the cities and townships that are here today. The forests were mostly replaced with farms, predominantly dairy farms, and by 1900, the area had a population of 468 people. In the 1900s, there was a lot of change here. The 1910s brought significant growth to the area after the completion of the Highland Park Ford plant. But between 1910 and 1920, the last of Berkeley's farms were sold and turned into subdivisions. And you can see in the photo on the left is Coolidge Highway in 1921. And so you can see the land use, the speculation for residential that was going on then in terms of the pending development. Also during that time, the first phone lines were laid and the first electric lines were introduced. In 1923, Berkeley officially became a village, and with that came its first election, fire and police departments, and basic infrastructure. At the time, Elmer Cromie had named the road that ran through his farm Berkeley, and the Berkeley School was then under construction, so the name Berkeley was chosen for the village. In 1927, the infrastructure of the village, sewers, water, sidewalks, and streets all were built. Growth in Berkeley came to a grinding halt in 1929 with the stock market crash and the Great Depression that followed. 90% of the 5,558 residents in Berkeley lost their job when the market crashed. Residents could no longer afford their taxes, and as a result, many services were canceled or reduced. The loss in tax revenue also forced shutoff of the electric streetlights. In 1932, Berkeley became a city so that taxes could be lowered. Berkeley continued to struggle until the start of World War II, which caused another surge of growth for the city. In the 1940s, suburbanization and the post-war boom economy drove significant development in the area, and you can see that in the photograph of 12 Mile in the center of this slide that dates from the late 1940s. We also want to say a special thanks to the Berkeley Historical Museum for providing us with these black and white photographs to share with you today. The city continued to grow and reached a peak population of 23,375 in 1960, and now it's just celebrated its 83rd birthday this past Saturday, May 23rd. So what does this mean? Especially when we're looking at a master plan. You are a 21st century community, but the layout was designed in the 1910s and 1920s, before the dominance of the car as a means of travel, and by individual developers with different intentions. Franklin and Dorothea Streets were originally platted with 100-foot wide lots for homes in 1914, while Elmwood, Thomas, and Cummings were platted as 40-foot wide lots in 1923. Most of 12 Mile was platted as 20-foot wide lots. Just to let you know, kind of industry standard in suburbs today, it's anywhere between a 60 to 100-foot lot. And infrastructure also for City of Berkeley was built primarily in the 1920s and then improved from there. So the influence of how people moved, worked, and lived in the early 20th century is still in Berkeley today. But what's going on today? Let's talk about your current land use. The map and the pie chart show where and the percentage of types of land uses today. The data on the map was done by a windshield survey where we drove around the city and looked at what different land uses were, and then we double checked that with the city assessing codes. As you can see by the dominance of yellow, most of the land uses in Berkeley, 73% is single family residential, and 10% is the cemetery. The commercial, institutional, and institutional, by the way, means schools, churches, etc. And that's shown in blue. Commercial is shown in red. And the parks, recreation, open space, that's shown in green. I'll account for about roughly 3% of the land area. And multiple family, so when more than two or three housing units are attached, and this could be a duplex to something like Oxford Towers, is little more than 2%. Is little more than 2%, as is parking as a land use. Office is a little over 1%, and industrial, vacant land, vacant buildings, and government are each less than 1%. So why is that important? It tells what your composition of your land use tells us a lot about is where where you're going to go, and also what you're prepared for. And so really the next question, or the so what, is does the current land use match demographic trends and preference shifts? So let's look at how Berkeley is predicted to change. These figures are from the Southeastern Michigan Council of Governments predictions for population. So if you look at the chart, the bar graph on the left-hand side, you'll see that the population of the city is estimated to decrease by around 200 folks. And that doesn't seem that dramatic. But when you look at the bar graph and you look at the age categories and how those are going to change within that 30 years, you'll see that there's a lot going on. The number of children and the numbers of family forming area cohort, meaning people who are having children, raising children and whatnot, those are all, and those who are coming out of, and those empty nesters, those are all predicted to go down. Whereas the only age cohorts that are predicted to go up are people who are over 65 years old. And especially your population that's over 85 is estimated to change by over 700 people. Meanwhile, if you look at the table, you'll see that there's been a shift in the entire region, that there are now more renters. And Berkeley right now is according to, in 2015, according to the U.S. Census, about 18% of the people, 18% of your households rented their home instead of owned their home. So, and people are choosing to rent rather than home ownership, due to a whole myriad of factors, including economics, aging, and lifestyle choices. So what does this really mean? Well, if you look at the pie chart, you'll see that 80% of your housing units are single-family detached. And only 5% of your housing units are in a building with 50 units or more. And we're assuming that most of that is Oxford Towers. And so looking at that, will the current housing meet the needs of the future population? And the simple answer to that question is, when you look at those core, when you look at the housing, is that likely not. And so we'll need to have, as part of this master plan conversation, about how does the community want to change those meet those needs, if at all. In terms of how we do that, is that the master plan includes a conversation around housing alternatives in Berkeley, including a webinar like this on June 24th at 6 p.m. Also, one of the things that we take into mind when looking at existing conditions and asking where to go in a master plan are preference shifts, such as an increasing desire for green communities. Greening of communities encompasses everything from multimodal transportation, meaning biking, walking, taking transit, to more parks and open space, to carbon neutrality and renewable energy. The city has invested in these things, such as the 2019 Energy Plan, continued parks and recreation planning and improvements. And as you can see in these photographs, you've got a very green community when just walking outside. The master plan should find ways to incorporate greening policies and actions, and we'll talk more about those possibilities on June 11th at 6 p.m. There's also been a shift in preferences to live in more walkable, bikeable, and transit-friendly communities. Walk scores and bike scores have come to influence home values. The great thing about Berkeley is, because you were built when you are walkable. You can see in the aerial photograph the block structure that makes it easy to walk to different places in the city. The corridors shown in gray, so 11 mile, 12 mile, Woodward, Coolidge, Greenfield, all are built to move cars, but also have sidewalks, and can accommodate bikes as well. You also have a bike route, and I know in your Parks and Recreation Plan, how to better sign or advertise that bike route will be further explored. Also, your community is served by the smart bus routes that are shown in blue. A portion of, as you can see though from this map, a portion of the city, that northeast corner, is not served by a bus route, and then sometimes there's a significant walk to get to transit. So, and while the city doesn't control that system and doesn't control some of the streets, those that they do, they can plan for, but even those that they don't, they can plan for. And also, as part of this process, as Ben had talked about at the last webinar, we will coordinate with those transit authorities and also those folks who own the roads, like Michigan Department of Transportation or the Road Commission of Oakland County. Speaking more about what is going on in terms of preference shifts is that we see several trends that are influencing those corridors. So Woodward, 11 Mile, and Coolidge specifically. First, there is more desire for restaurants, particularly fast casual. So we expect to see more of those come and want to come and be somewhere in Berkeley. Second, more people are telecommuting or working from home, especially now. And we see that as actually as one of the trends that's going to be even further exacerbated or echoed from this pandemic, since so many of us are working at home, and it may not be possible that we would all go back, or some companies may shift and say that they look in the future and think that they don't need as much office space as they once did. If a corridor is only zoned or planned for commercial or office, it may not be set up to thrive, especially also because demand for new retail space by national and regional change has diminished substantially. So with a need for more housing options, there could be increased pressure for residential uses along those corridors. So changes in preferences may greatly impact the future land use, especially along Woodward, 12 Mile, 11 Mile, and Coolidge. We'll go to more detail about those possible changes and talk about them with you and get community feedback on June 11th at 11 o'clock in the morning. The upcoming schedule includes a series of more webinars running through June 30th. In addition, we're having weekly online drop-ins where people can ask any questions that they want or responses to other comments and provide additional insight. The time of days of those varies, so check berkeleymich.org master plan for the schedule. Also, go to the city website to find the link to the survey. We're happy to report that as of this morning, there were 997 responses, and we would love to get over 1,000 individual responses before we close at the end of the week. We want to thank you. We want you also to continue to share with us. Here are various ways to get in touch with us and give us your thoughts. With that, we would be happy to answer any questions. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to share them in the Q&A, or also to raise your hand and we can unmute your mic and have you and share what your question is that way.
Let's just spitball some questions here, Megan. If you want to do that? Okay.
Absolutely.
So what type of demographic shift or change do you think you feel will have the biggest impact?
I think the shift in the amount of people who are over 65 will have a big impact. I think that will have a big impact on what type of services you need to provide as a city. But also, I think it would influence walking and driving or not driving, and what types of services people needed and how close they needed them to be to them, such as medical services. Somebody who's 85 or 90 may not be able to drive, and so if they're completely dependent on a car or they don't have family members nearby, it would not, it's just not a feasible place. I see that in the question and answer, Kurt asked, you say that there's only 197 surveys that completed. No, it's 997 surveys. So we're 3 off from 1,000.
So make sure you tell all your family, friends, neighbors. We really want to get as many surveys completed as we possibly can. Mm-hmm. Keep plugging that.
So I also think that in terms of shifts or preferences on your corridors, for a long time, those have been, and throughout most communities, have been planned and zoned primarily for retail. And the assumption is that retail would thrive and it would always fill up. But what we've seen over the past 10 years is that those commercial corridors, there's not enough demand because people are buying things in a different way. With people are buying online, or they also may be buying in bulk. And so the smaller footprint stores are not doing as well. And also, we've seen the building footprint for buildings get bigger. So, for instance, a drugstore used to be a much smaller footprint. But now, because they sell a whole variety of things that they didn't sell 20 years ago, they're looking for a footprint that's substantially bigger than some of the individual parcels you might have available in Berkeley. And then to get them to move that, to move their standard architectural plan often is a lot of persuasion, and they'll go looking for the easy place first.
So how would Berkeley stay competitive in that type of realm? So they're looking for the bigger boxes.
Right, and they're looking for the box. So I think you choose what you're good at, and what Berkeley, you have a great sense of place. So you're a walkable community that's got an involved public. Also, you've got really full rooftops that are around you, and so rooftops drive retail. So it's just a matter of also finding those folks and saying, look, we want your urban model. We don't want your suburban model. And then also you can change your zoning set up in your planning so that you make that the easy choice for the developer or for somebody who's renovating. Also, the other thing that you can do is to look on those corridors to make sure that they're not just retail. So what are the other things that could go on Coolidge or 11 Mile or 12 Mile? And the answer may not be the same for Coolidge as it is for 12 Mile, as it is for Greenfield, as it is for 11 Mile. And we can take some time during this master plan process to really think about what those uses are and then how they should look. Because also one of the innovations in zoning is looking at design as well as just land use. And you can do that in a master plan as well, as set the tone for what you want to have in your community. But, Erin, I had a question for you.
Sure.
What do you think, particularly in Berkeley, what do you think the services, amenities, needs are going to be needed to accommodate that aging population?
Well, I certainly think that we have an aging population. We definitely have an aging population here based on your demographics, and the types of service and amenities and need that would be required to service them will have to change and modify as it is. The aging population isn't what it was 30 years ago, where they didn't do anything. We have a population that's active and wants to do things. So I think by having an updated streetscape design where they can go and walk and feel safe within the community is definitely going to be something that we look at. Any number of pocket parks and little local areas where they can go and congregate. They're not going to be playing dodgeball in the community center, but certainly something that they can go and have maybe even a little bit more of a passive type of recreation activity. I think is something that's going to be very important in the community.
Yeah. That I think answers in part Joe Bardis's question. To what degree should the aging groups also influence items in the master plan should be less of? For example, Parks and Rec currently seems to focus on outdoor spaces for young families. Older citizens may enjoy tennis courts, pickleball courts, exercise parks, lap tracks, etc. Yeah, and I think also one of the rules, good design rules of Parks and Recreation is to always have an active and a passive component. so that people can enjoy those spaces, whether you're actively participating or whether you want to just sit and enjoy and see what's going on. And I think, especially with the demographics that you're forecasted, I think to ask that question at each turn, is this serving seniors, but is this also serving young families? Because of your good schools and your great neighborhoods, you're going to continue to attract those young families to Berkeley. So, what about, we got a question from Kurt that says, do you think this current pandemic or any future might increase the demand for mass transit? Wow, that is a good question, Kurt. You know, there's been a variety of things about mass transit that have gone on during the pandemic. Some major systems have seen less ridership. And so since the fees and the ridership often are part of the financing, that might affect things because you're in close quarters and people are also concerned about how things are being cleaned and whatnot. However, that demand for mass transit also might increase in terms of looking to get to certain places. And I think more that demand for mass transit is going to come into play, again, with aging populations, but also that consumer trend looking to have more mobility outside of a car. And so, especially for a community like yours, which is planned to be part of the Regional Transportation Authority, we would recommend looking at how do you set the stage for transit coming and what does that look like. And also to articulate what your needs are and what your wants are as a community. Anything to add on that, Erin?
No, I mean, certainly the ridership, has decreased, like you said, at this time, but also because people don't have anywhere to go. Things are closed right now. I mean, riding to ride isn't high on their priority list, whereas to just get out and get moving maybe was at one point. So it's not having the ability to go anywhere certainly decreased it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, one question that always comes up is how do we plan for an aging population, but also provide and plan for children, young adults, and young families? And too often I think that we silo these groups and look at their different needs. I think a great thing to do is to look at what their shared needs are first. And in terms of looking at what a city provides, everybody needs to get food. Everybody needs to get to work or get their basic needs. And everybody needs to be able to get from point A to point B. And so how do we deliver those things? And then how do we deliver those, rather sometimes for ages, maybe for people of all capabilities? Because a lot of the things about, especially transportation, are contingent on some of your ability to move or your ability to see in terms of if we're depending on the car. So Dennis Henneman, as part of our current conditions, we also looked at our neighbors' current conditions and how our plans, needs, and wants fits with their plan. And yeah, we have, but we're one step off from reporting out on that, because after looking at folks' plans and wants and needs, we wanted to have some conversations with their staff and get some information from them about how we can really work together. And where the places are that maybe there's a little friction between the community, what we can do to iron those out, but also what long-term plans are and looking at those. So expect more reporting on that probably within a month. Lisa Kempner, do you think this area will see a real interest in mass transit in the near future? Southeast Michigan seems to be somewhat resistant to the idea. I think Berkeley ridership is something like 2%. So mass transit is a really sticky wicket in Michigan. Some of it goes back to how it's funded. which is through property tax, and that's by the Michigan Constitution. So in order to have a functional regional transportation system, you need everybody on board, or everybody contributing a part of property tax to that. And so that's one of the reasons for Regional Transit Authority, and looking at that as more of a whole, and looking at that as a taxing entity, and then can go to the whole thing. Also, in terms of Berkeley ridership, and being something like 2%, how that ridership evolves over time also has to deal with how well that current system delivers. So if the current system is only delivering 2 times a day, and doesn't vary at peak times, it's not going to get increased ridership. If it only serves the people who don't have a car, it's not going to be a vibrant system. And so I think more of the main question is, at this point, if there could be a transit system like there are in other regions in the United States, I'm thinking Cleveland or the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, that look to service the whole region, and again, look to provide mobility for people of all incomes and all levels. That this isn't just for those who don't have a car, and that at some point in time, this, for some people in really vibrant areas with transit, that transit often becomes the preferred option because it's just more convenient. But it's a hard question, and it's something also that the city doesn't have that much control over, because you're one of dozens of municipalities that are have a seat at the table, and what the landscape of how those decisions are made keeps changing, election to election. All right. Any other questions?
These are some really great questions, so please keep them coming.
All right. Well, Erin, what so far is the response on the census?
On the census?
Yeah, because a lot of our existing data is on, the data that I presented is based off of census data from 2010, and then mixed in with what your existing land use is and building permits and whatnot. And I think you were saying that Berkeley had a pretty good response rate at this time.
Yes, we do. We have about 85% of Berkeley residents have responded. So that's one of the highest in the state of Michigan. So we're doing great. We need more. Please keep sending those in if you haven't done it yet. But we're one of the communities that definitely fills those out and sends them in. So we're very grateful for that.
Well, and that's great. And also that census data would probably come out in 2022, 2023. Mm-hmm. And at that point in time,
it takes a couple of years for that to get all compiled and
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you'll probably have a different snapshot or two of where things are going. And that's one of the reasons that the state of Michigan requires you to plan once every 5 years. So maybe you won't do it as a comprehensive process as this, but there'll be some more demographics coming.
Yeah, the ACS, the American Community Survey, which is just a brief snapshot, provides some ideas in the intermittent years, but certainly it's not as a thorough, comprehensive of an overview as the census allows.
Mm-hmm. Well, one question that I know we're going to get from somebody is that, there seems to be a lot of fixed land uses between, like, the cemetery's not going anywhere, right? And then once a single family house is there, it very rarely turns into something else, or at least at mass scale. in a short amount of time. So, how much do we think the land use and the demographics are really going to change in the next 10 to 20 years? And I would say that where you're going to see the most changes, again, along those corridors.
Hmm. Yeah, those tend to be the ones that change the most. Just they are the larger parcels. They generally have parking, connected to them. So those are the ones that have changed from at one point maybe have been residential and then were incorporated into small scale commercial retail and then evolved a little bit further and parcels got combined and bigger places were constructed. But those are the areas that will typically see the most amount of change. Your single family interior residential properties inside the neighborhoods, those are pretty sound in what they are, and we don't expect those to be changing a whole lot.
Yeah. But on those neighborhoods, there's one thing I saw today when I was preparing for this webinar, and I was looking back at census data from 2000 and 2010 about the year a structure was built. So in 2000, the number of structures, so houses, essentially single family houses, that were built in 1939 or earlier was over 1,000. But in the 2010 census, it was a little less than 800. And also then, and they're projected to continue to, and that's projected to hold steady. But it may be that looks like a big shift of a number of units over that time. So over 200 units over that time. But at the same time, houses that were 2005 or later jumped. And so what it says to me is that these older houses are being torn down and replaced with new structures. And we've heard a lot in the community about sometimes feeling that these are out of scale and don't quite fit. But looking at this, it may be that you're only going to see more of that within the community, especially since you've got both, in the 2010 census, almost 3,000 units were built between 1940 and 1949. And again, over 2,000 units were built between 1950 and 1959. So that might be changed within neighborhoods.
Yeah, that's certainly the change that has been happening. Is the newer structures are being developed and some of the older ones are being removed. However, it is still going from single family to single family. The nature of the land use itself has not changed from single family to multifamily or industrial for that matter. But yes, the housing stock has over the last couple of years, last 10 years, has changed. The small little post-World War II bungalows are now being removed for the larger scale homes to accommodate the growing family and the larger, open concept, the bigger kitchens, the things that we see on in magazines and things that we like. So that type of development has shifted, but certainly the dominance of the single family home still rings supreme here in Berkeley.
So Kurt asked, so are there some things that we have not tried that might help encourage development along our major thoroughfares? So just based on what I've learned in the past couple of months, is that it seems like what you've tried on your corridors are very specific prescribed things. So, these 5 types of uses will go here and nowhere else. And these uses are going to be here. And then, these uses are going to go down. This is the mix is going to be on Coolidge. But you seem to have some very specific formulas along Greenfield and then also along 11 Mile. And sometimes if that zoning doesn't have enough flexibility, it doesn't It doesn't move with the market. And so maybe something to discuss are some truly mixed use areas, and also where we're not making little patchwork quilts parcel by parcel of what can go there, and then have it more flow. I think also one of the things that we do on older corridors is we really look at the dimensions of the lots and see what they can accommodate. And many of your lots, as I said, like on 12 Mile, they were originally platted at 20 feet width, and I think only 80 feet back, something like that. That's not a lot of area. And they definitely weren't anticipating a parking lot or anybody parking. So it wasn't originally designed with that. So there are also some other things that can be looked at to help alleviate kind of what comes along now with 21st century. So you have to assume that somebody's driving and they have to put their car somewhere, right? So that's why we're going to have a webinar about parking. And that may be one of the things that's preventing things from happening on corridors. Also, I don't know how much you've ever looked at, and Erin, maybe you can help me out here. How much has the city sincerely looked at different types of housing along corridors?
Well, I know that's something that has been discussed previously that predates my tenure here with the city, so I can't give you a personal account for it, but I know that is something that had been discussed during the previous administration to look at putting more residential on those corridors.
Right. And really kind of where the rub comes is how that's designed and where that comes and how it leads to be something that's helpful to the neighborhood and not a harmful impact. And a lot of that goes into, and some of that just goes into the design, is where do you put parking? Where do you put trash? Where do you put these other things? And then how is it screened from the neighborhood? But then also looking at, what helps this area as a core, and who's coming to it. And so all of your areas where you probably, looked at as everybody, if we're going to put retail here, it's only the people who are walking within 10 minutes at that point in time in the 1910s and the 1920s and then 30s and 40s. It's only really once we get in the 50s, 60s that it's really car dominated. And then now retailers look at a 5-10 mile drive rather than a 5-10 minute walk. And so there's just some, again, because you've got this 20th century construct that's on the ground, and we're trying to bring 21st century things to it that may be bigger or carry more stuff. But you can also do things so that you are looking to do smaller uses or less impactful uses or a mix of uses, and saying that's okay. You've got to have the conversation with community members of what are you willing to live next door to, and how. Because when you don't have that conversation and you just introduce, well, we're going to do these new uses, usually what happens is that policy change, whether it was well-intentioned or whether it was going to be good for the community in the end, doesn't happen. And so that's one of the things we want to do in terms of having these series of conversations.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
We did have a question about the thoroughfares and from Kurt Height. So are there some things that we have not tried that might help encourage development along the major thoroughfares? Yeah,
and I would say maybe that looking at some mixed use, and also I think really looking at what the footprints are on each place in terms of the lots, how they're doing, looking at the parking, and then also having conversation about would there be some sort of residential that fits there. So thanks, Kurt. Also, Erin, you had posed this to me at one point in time. How could more housing types be incorporated in a community that's predominantly smaller single family lots? And there's not a lot of room. The good news is that there's not a lot of vacant buildings. There's not a lot of vacant lots. In some ways that means that there's not there, there's not you only have so much wiggle room to accommodate changing needs. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we've talked about is, again, could you adaptively reuse buildings? And you had an example of that with the school building, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The former, the La Salette School on Coolidge has gained Planning Commission approval for multifamily housing. That's going to go into the existing structure. They're not putting on any additions or any changes to the outside, really, just some additional windows. But they're going to refurbish the interior of the building.
Mm-hmm. And so looking at buildings like that, which have always been a school or a church or something else, and having some just parameters that, okay, if it's not that, we'll be sad, but what else could go there? And have that conversation, and then document it in the master plan. There's also other things that you can look at in terms of accessory dwelling units, so granny flats, et cetera, or a mother-in-law suite, but those also then have more impacts because then you have more people living in the same area, and then also in the world we live in, more cars. And so, what do you do with the cars, and whatnot? So there also could be some things on corridors where, again, if that's where the most change is that where we're going to plan for and make it easy to build things that would accommodate aging seniors or would be attractive to young singles who are now really looking for something different than what those age groups were looking for 10 years ago. All right, well, we are nosing up to the end of our time.
Sure.
Yeah, it's 4:47. So does anybody have anything else they want to share, especially for the attendees? How do you think existing conditions, what are the existing conditions that you're concerned about the most, or you think affect the master plan, or things maybe that you don't want to have change, that think that this is what we should be actively preserving?
You can feel free to type your question into that Q&A or your response, or you can also raise your hand and answer it that way. That's easier for you.
Okay, Lisa, what are aging seniors looking for in housing generally? Apartment buildings, aging in place, something else? Aging seniors looking for housing are generally looking for less. So they don't want to take care of a yard, and they want one story, so that if anybody has joint or mobility issues, that they're not going up and down stairs to do laundry or things like that. So your classic bungalow doesn't serve their needs because they've got to go upstairs to sleep, and usually they've got to go downstairs in order to do their laundry. Apartment buildings sometimes. Also, they may be looking for a duplex or a triplex that's an attached model. So, three two to three bedroom units that are attached together. Aging in place, when we've done some research, is really only how it works for the really, really wealthy, who can afford to have all these services come to them, or to those who are lower in the socioeconomic scale and are in poverty, actually, because then they qualify for government services to come with them. That aging in place doesn't necessarily work for you once you get post 80 and have difficulty taking care of things, but also you might need some assistance yourself. And so also people are looking for services. Another thing in terms of a demographic trend is that people tend to move when they're in their seat, when they're older and they need assistance, to where their children are. And where their older children who are helping to take care of them are, often drives where they end up. So I don't know. Did you have anything else on that, Erin?
They also want to locate somewhere where there's something nearby. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be that building that's off in the corner. Yes, they've got, community green space around them, and that's wonderful, but they want to be able to, while they still have the ability to walk to their grocery store, walk to the bookstore at the corner, or walk to the nearby pharmacy. So they want to have something that's located nearby that they can conveniently get to without having to drive. That's one of the things that I've heard in over the last few years.
Yeah, and one thing also with seniors is that's very challenging is social isolation. And so that's another reason by design we shouldn't put everybody in a corner once they reach over age 65. Is that people who are older, and my parents are in their 70s, I know that they want to be out, they want to be biking, they want to be walking, they want to be interacting with kids. My mom's a former school teacher. She was, she volunteers for lots of things. And so, looking at those folks as people as assets, and how also they can always be part of the community, and actually an asset to young families, and bringing those two groups together. All right, we had another question from Joshua Pearson. How much engagement with our neighboring communities, Oak Park, Huntington Woods, Royal Oak, and Southfield, is involved when making final decisions on those bordering roads? Well, Josh, it all depends on who owns them and maintains them. So if it's the road commission is going to make that determination. And so, but if the city owns them, the city has some influence and maintains them. But I'm not sure on what each of those border roads are, who owns and maintains each of those border roads. And obviously Woodward is its own animal as well. Erin, do you have any insights to share with that?
Well, 12 Mile Road is a state road, so that's owned by the county. Coolidge is owned here by the city, but that's obviously not a border road. 11 Mile is, I can't recall on that one. So, when there's anything that goes on with the road, no matter, and the properties around it, we try to work with the neighboring communities around us in order to make sure that there's cooperation. Okay, 11 Mile is city. Thank you very much. So we try to work with the communities around us so that way it's more of a joint effort. Now, certainly they don't have any control over what we do on our city properties on our side, but we like to have a working collaborative relationship with our community members and our neighbors. So anything that we would do along 11 Mile, Greenfield, or Woodward, if it's going to be something that changes the scope of how everything interacts, then we would consult with our neighbors next door to make sure that it aligns with, maybe they want to be a part of it. Maybe they see that as something like, ooh, we want to do that too. And then we can work together and make that a cohesive look from one side of the road to the other.
Yeah. And especially if you can be in partnership with another community in terms of what you want to do with a road, it helps you always when you're looking for grants or to petition someone to kind of get up in the line for improvements if you have more than one municipality who's asking. So Kurt, you had your hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think he was more questioning on like uses per, like you want to coordinate uses rather than what you're going to do with the road itself.
Okay.
It's like if you're coordinating, we're going to put something here, and what are they doing across the street? So it kind of works together. instead of being something totally different and compatible.
Okay, well, thanks for the clarification. So in Michigan, we're a home rule state, and so each community can control what happens on the land on each side. Our goal, and I think Erin said it, was to work in partnership with people and make sure that things mesh as best they can. And then, but in terms of like actual teeth to get them to do something, there's not a lot there. What's in state law in Michigan is that any master plan, when it's developed, has to go to the adjacent communities for review. And that's at the end of that process. So that would probably be 6 to 9 months from now. And so all your adjoining communities would review it, and they'll give written feedback back if they so choose. A lot of times they'll just say, that's fine. And then by law, the planning commission has to consider it and then make a decision. But if they make a decision, but there's nothing to say like you have to take their advice in the state law. It's just you have to look at it, say you looked at it, and then you can take any action from there. And that again goes back to the Michigan Constitution. We're a home rule state, things like that. What we would hope to do is during this process is talk to those folks who are adjacent and then try to rectify those friction points and see what we can do. But also knowing that they have a set of parameters and Berkeley has a set of parameters, and there's some things that may not change for a while. And so you can look at things short term, medium term, and long term. But the goal is to do that in partnership, but there's not a lot of teeth to force the issue. Erin, anything to add about adjacent communities?
I wholeheartedly agree.
So, all right. Well, we're at the end of our time with you. We want to thank you all for coming out today. We hope to see you next week. Oh, wait. I think I see one more. Has anyone looked at a boarded border bird's eye view of the city with a multiple variable point of view? Green space, open space, less utilized space, park usage as it applies to the needs and wants of the community. I think that's what we're trying to do as part of this process. But thank you for giving us a great list of questions to keep us honest in doing that. And so thanks, Kari. All right. Well, again, we're at the end of our time. So I want to turn it over to you, Erin, to close us out.
Well, thank you everyone for attending, for your wonderful questions and feedback. We greatly appreciate this. This will really help us out as we continue moving forward in the master plan process. We are we have scheduled our next drop-in is scheduled for this Thursday, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. And that's where you can come in and ask any question pertaining to the master plan that you would like. Our next webinar is scheduled for next week. It will be Tuesday, June 2nd. This will be an evening session. It'll be from 6 to 7 p.m. And this will tackle the topic of parking. So this has been a hot topic issue here in the city of Berkeley. So get your questions ready, get your thoughts ready. We really look forward to speaking with you all about that. And then the following day we'll have the drop-in for that. Also live is our survey. This is the final week in order to get those responses in. So as Megan said, we have 997 responses as of this morning. So come on. So get your neighbors, your friends, your relatives, your anyone that you can think of in Berkeley who has something to say. Please direct them over to the city website to fill that out. And if you have any lingering questions or concerns about the master plan, you can always feel free to email us at masterplan@berkeleymish.net, and one of us will be able to get back to you with those answers. Okay. Thank you. Have a great day. Stay safe. Stay healthy. See you next time.